So I've had a couple of requests come through my emails, and the first one I want to do is problem number two. So in problem number two, remember the first day of regular exponent properties? Um, I told you guys, well, sometimes it's easier if you regroup these. That's exactly what I'm going to do in number two. Okay, I'm going to group these as my numbers because it's all multiplication. And my Utes and my V. Okay, my numbers is 4 and 3, it's multiplication. My U's, the two Utes, U to the 1/2 times my other U is U to the -2. And then my V, or actually I only have the one V, V to the -1/3. Okay. So to continue, I'm gonna do every step separate. So a couple of these steps you can combine once you get going, but I'm gonna do every step separate. So 4 times 3 is 12. The U's are the same base, so I have to add the exponents. So I have to add 1/2 plus -2. Now I'm going to put that -2 over 1 because we're dealing with fractions. Now you could use a calculator and spit out an answer, which we'll do eventually. But I want you guys to at least try a couple of these to get that rust out of your brains because on the SATs, there's a section, there's what's called a no calculator section, and you're going to have to be doing a lot of adding and subtracting of fractions. So this is a good opportunity to try to do a couple of these. Okay. Now, in order for us to add or subtract two fractions together, we need a common denominator, right? I'm going to leave the plus sign in there. You could put a minus because it's a plus minus. And I'm going to look at the denominators, and I have to use I like using the lowest common denominator. You could just multiply these two together and get a common denominator, then later simplify. But if you use the lowest common denominator, you get to skip that step. So the lowest common denominator with factors of 2 and 1 is going to be 2. Okay, so I look at that first fraction, and I don't have to do anything because the denominator is already 2. So I don't have to multiply that 1 by anything. Now the second fraction, I had to change that 1 to a 2, so I multiplied it by 2. And whatever I do to the denominator, I'm going to have to do to the numerator so I don't change the value of that fraction. So I get -2 times 2 is -4. Now I can add these or combine them or subtract, however you want to think about it, with the common denominator 2, and then just add or subtract the top. So 1 plus a -4, -3. So my U has an exponent of -3/2. Now I only have the 1b. The 1b has an exponent of -1/3. Now I can't leave negative exponents in my answer. So the way we get rid of that, remember we put this all over 1 and we flip or move those exponents to make them positive. So I get 12, and the u I have to put down here make it positive, 3/2, and a pretty ugly u. And then the v, I also have to move to the denominator and make it positive. That's my answer. Questions? Okay. I'm going to do number 5 next. Now, number 5, it seems like a lot, and it is, because I have a fraction with exponentials that are fractions. So, exponents, sorry. So what I'm going to do to make my life a little more easier and understandable is I'm going to make these individual fractions, okay? I have my 3/4. Then my x's, oops, here's my x's, and then my y. Now I only have y in the numerator, but that's okay. I'm going to circle it anyway. Okay, so there's nothing I can do with 3/4. It's already reduced. I'm going to leave it. Well, you have to leave it. Then I look at my x's. So I have the exponents, and because it's a fraction, I'm going to take the exponent 5/3. And again, I'm going to have to subtract the 5/4 because it's a fraction. And that's what the property says. I have to subtract the exponents. All right, so we could put this in a calculator and get an answer, but let me do it manually first, then I'll show you in the calculator. All right, common denominator. Now, the common denominator here, it happens to be, if I multiply these together, 3 times 4 is 12. It is the lowest common denominator for these two fractions. Doesn't always work that way, but sometimes it does. So the 5/3, I had to multiply the 3 by 4 to get 12. I'm going to have to multiply the 5 by 4 to get 20 minus, let's see, I had to get the 4 to become 12 multiplied by 3. So I'm going to have to multiply the numerator by 3. And I have 15 twelfths. Now I can subtract or combine those fractions. 20 minus 15 is 5/12. So, and it's positive. So my x, these were the x's. So my x has the exponent of 5/12. And then I have the y. I don't have to do anything with it because it's only the one term. Y, I leave it on top because it's positive. And there's my answer. Okay. Now let me show you how to do this in a calculator. When you're using your calculator, and I know it depends a lot on the type of calculator you have, even if you have the same calculator, sometimes that particular calculator might even have a different operating system. So you're going to have to, play around with your calculator, see what works. Now, whenever I'm dealing with fractions, I always put them in parentheses because your calculators are unforgiven on PEMDAS. It strictly goes by PEMDAS. PEMDAS. And sometimes, with fractions, it gets kind of tricky. So please do yourself a favor and put them in parentheses. That way you don't have to worry about it. So I'm taking my 5/3. I need to subtract my fraction 5/4. 5 divided by 4. I hit my enter button. Most of us are going to have to change that to a fraction. I'm going to hit my math button and then enter, enter, and I get my 5/12. Obviously, a lot easier to do it on a calculator than manually doing it. But like I said, if you need some, get the rust out of your gears there, do this until you feel comfortable adding and subtracting fractions again. Questions? I'm going to do one more. Let's scoot down to number 7. Okay. So number 7, I have a power raised to a power. So, or in other words, I have an exponent outside parentheses. So I'm going to have to distribute. I'm going to call it distribute because I have more than one variable here to each of the exponents inside. Now, I'm also, because I have all multiplication here, like problem number 2, I'm going to regroup at the same time. Okay. So I'm going to have my x's, and then I'm going to have my y's. Okay, so my x's, I have x to the -1 times 1/4 gives me my x to the -1/4. And again, it's all multiplication, so I'm going to put a multiplication sign there. And then my other x is x to the -1/3. Now my y. My first y, I have to take the 3/2 times 1/4. I'm taking 3/2 times 1/4. Now, multiplication's a little easier than subtracting and adding fractions because you just go straight across top, straight across bottom. It would be helpful if you make sure none of the, see if you can cancel out any factors top to bottom, but you can always just simplify the fraction afterwards. Right now, there's nothing to cancel out, so I have 3/8. I have y to the 3/8, and then my other y is y squared. Okay, so now looking at the first group, I have my -1/4, and it's multiplication, so I have to add -1/3. And again, if you're rusty, I highly suggest doing it manually. Okay, this is a negative. So I had to multiply that by 3. So I need to multiply that by 3. I needed to multiply the 3 by 4. So I need to multiply the -1 by 4. Add these together. -3 plus -4, -7. So I have x to the -7/12. And then my y, I need to take my 3/8 plus 2, and I'm going to do that in the calculator this time. I get my 3/8, I'm going to put in a parentheses, 3 divided by 8, and then I'm going to add 2. Hit enter, Hit math, enter, enter. I get 19/8. Oh, sorry, it's a y. Y to the 19/8. So I have a negative exponent. I'm going to have to make that a fraction. And put the x in the bottom, change it to a positive 7/12, and my y on top with the 19/8. Questions? Obviously, a lot easier using a calculator for this than doing it manually, but you got to know how to do this for the standardized testing. Any questions on any of these? This is not an easy topic. You guys good?